Well, this is a treat. My friend Dave Hendrickson from the Longview Community Church.
That's right, the Longview.
Yeah, we're going to sit down today and just have a little conversation about who he is and where he's come from and what he's seen since he started doing ministry here in Longview. And I'm really excited about that, Dave. You and I have had a really good friendship growing, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you a lot. Dave's been here for about 2.5 years, and maybe you could explain to him a little bit about your journey, how you got here, and especially how you got to Longview Community Church, because this is a long ways away from home for you.
It is, and I appreciate it. I'm excited about this, and like you said, I see it as a friendship, and I do too, but I'm just excited because really, Jeff, you're someone I sort of look up to, right? Oh. And I needed someone to sort of bounce things off of since I was new, and and I appreciate your wisdom, and you know the culture, you know the people, you know the community, and so you've been a huge resource for me personally, and in return for Longview Community Church, and that, I'm excited about CityServe. Yeah. I think this is just, you're really sort of coming into your wheelhouse, and I'm excited to hear and see what God does with CityServe. This last season, before moving to Longview, we were back in Pittsburgh, my wife and I, my family, and we were doing ministry there for about 10 years. And I was an associate pastor, and I'd get these emails from different leadership organizations, and they would say, "Hey, this church is looking for a job or a pastor." And I was sort of praying and going, "Lord, I like where I am, but it'd be interesting if there's something that you call me to or is a good fit." Came across Longview Community Church, and I was like, I'll click on it, and I'm reading about it and about the church. And seriously, as I was reading through it, I was like, wow, this reminds me a lot of the church that I grew up in. Yeah. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and everything, the decor, the way the church building looked, the people, reading through their theology and everything, and I was like, wow, this really sounds like what I'm used to. Yeah. But the cool thing and the attractive thing that I, was interested in and praying about was, as I read their information, as I got to know them and had some conversation with them, they wanted to transition. Community church being the longest established church in Longview, yeah. And they had a way of doing things. They were interested in where's the church going? How's the kingdom moving? There was just a lot of similarity, and then their hope and their vision to want to make some transition because they knew that who they were and the way they were doing things wasn't necessarily going to reach the next generation. Yeah. And that excited me. That was like, yeah. Because quite honestly, I prayed and I kept asking God, maybe I should plant a church in Pittsburgh. And I really felt like God kept saying, no, we don't need really necessarily more church plants in the area I was. Right. And I've always had a love of sort of institutional church. I grew up in it. I have an understanding for it. There are some things that I'm like, we're a little too rigid on, and I'm willing to try to stretch those boundaries. And so I sent in my application. We began the conversation, and about 1.5 years. It wasn't, they definitely did their due diligence at Community Church. They had a lot of questions, and I had a lot of questions for them. And yeah. In the end, they said, yeah, we feel like God's calling you to be the next pastor, and I sort of felt the same. And I guess the thing for me is, it sort of saddens me, is to see some churches that have had amazing ministries, decades and sometimes centuries of ministry, just dying. Yeah. And quite honestly, I think the easiest thing to do, and we do live in an American culture, is, well, we'll just do something new. Yeah. It's easier to do something new, to do it on your own, than it is to try to revive something and transition it, right? But for me, I like the challenge. I think people want change. Yeah. And we've talked about this, is, and from some leadership people that I've listened to and read, people want change. It's the transition that's difficult, right? So if I were to say, hypothetically, you're driving some beat up car and I go to a teenager and say, hey, I have this brand new 2022, Volvo that is just top of the line, and you're driving a 1987 Honda Civic, people are like, yeah, I want change. I want the new thing, right? But then you get in it and you realize, wait a second, the buttons aren't in the same place. The radio dial's doesn't do what I'm used to.
Yeah.
And that's the transition. People want change. And even a congregation like Community Church, who, honestly is one of the older demographic churches in our area.
Right.
But there are people there who do want change.
And they love the church.
And they do. They love the church. But the difficulty is that now you're taking them out of a car or that they're so used to, and they know where the buttons are and they know how things work, and now you're putting them in a new car and they're going, wow, we really like this car. But how does it work?
Yeah.
Where are the buttons? How do I make the seat go forward? Because no longer I reach under here. Now it's an electronic here. Now my phone's connected to it, right? And so that's the transition, trying to help people go, And the other thing, is the message of the gospel stayed the same.
Yep.
But the method is different. So the message of Jesus Christ is the same, but the method in which we share it, how the culture understands it, relates to it, is different.
Leading through this pandemic has been like driving in the fog. And I know that because I've driven from Clatskanie, where I grew up, to Longview a lot of times. There's fog over that hill all the time. And you literally at times are looking out the window to see the white line on the road, and it's scary as all get out. But you find yourself gripping the wheel really tightly, and you get finished after driving through the fog, and it's like you don't realize your hands are tired and your mind's just wound up. And he says that's what it's been like to lead through this pandemic, is that you're white knuckling your way through this.
And I love that. And I'm an Enneagram 8, and I'm a challenger, and I like challenge, and that just
give me some fun.
Yeah, give it to me, right? And I can't promise I'm going to deal with it the right way. I might hit some things, if you give me that new car, it might come back with some things missing off of it, but I'm willing to drive into the fog because that excites me. Why? Maybe I'm a bit like Peter in this.
Yeah.
I see Jesus out there. I'm jumping out of the boat.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try my darndest to keep my eyes on him. I know I don't. I do let the fog get in the way. I let the winds and the waves blow me over.
Yeah.
But but quite honestly, the COVID being thrown into that in the midst of trying to transition a church that's been established for, we're getting close to 100 years now. A lot of things had to begin to happen. And COVID's, we've fortunately been able to work within COVID. But there's more transitions that Community Church has gone through than just sort of COVID and a new lead pastor. They sat down and they prayerfully considered their bylaws and their governance, and they had to make some really difficult decisions before I even came. And I didn't stipulate, hey, you need to make these before I'll come. That was happening already within the church and some of the other people and candidates they were talking to, like, hey, you need to evaluate exactly. And so I came, and there was a new governance, there was the new bylaws, and now the new senior pastor. I call him. I've transitioned it to a lead pastor title. And so there's just been that, and then, like you said, then COVID hits, and it's, well, what do you do? And
transition is all about movement.
Yeah, and
now somebody says you can't have movement. Well, how do you transition if you can't move?
Well, you have to move in new ways.
Yeah.
We can't move in the way in which we were used to, what was the movement? Well, movement was Sunday morning.
Yep.
Everyone just come to church. Now no one can come to church.
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah, how do you do that?
And so for me, when it first came down, like everything shut down, the next week, I was thinking of every which way to continue to communicate to the congregation, to share the message, but the method had to be different.
Yeah.
And so going back to the original question of, well, how do you help in the transition? I think you have to understand who you are and who God's called you to be. And then saying, what resources are there? I mean, I looked at Community Church and I was asking what resources,
Right.
are there for me to use? And so there was a great history and tradition and a great foundation, as I say, built at Community Church. The people were there. They were dedicated to serving the Lord, loving the people in the community. Resources in the sense of, facility resources of a building and, several buildings, a chapel, and different ways to do ministry. And quite honestly, there wasn't a mortgage to have to worry about being
Right.
paid. And as a new first-time lead pastor, I was like, wow, I don't have to worry about that.
That's huge.
And then also just to see the financial resources and the love that the members of the church, they were faithful givers, and so that made it easy in the transition. And then understanding the culture. I think what COVID has taught me, and I've listened to podcasts and other pastors and teachers and leaders say, maybe God's trying to get our attention through COVID and the method.
Yeah.
Have we built up these huge churches? Is it all about the Sunday morning experience? And one of the things that has helped us as a local church is has helped us to look outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
That's one of the things COVID's helped us with. And so I think churches in general, are we looking outside of ourselves? Are we trying to really minister to those who aren't part of our congregation? And then also, is the method of Sunday worship the vehicle for the next sort of generation of church?
Can we get it done with that vehicle?
It's hard for me to say that because I grew up in that vehicle.
Right.
I was trained to drive that vehicle. I was taught how to make fixes and repairs to that vehicle of Sunday morning worship and how it's put together. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to be what we understand church to be, 15, 20 years from now.
You are a good pastor. You're a good leader. And I love doing ministry with you. I love the thought of going together as we move forward and not just trying to figure this out on my own. It's just really, it's been a joy getting to know you, and you're a huge blessing to the city. We celebrate you and the fact that Community Church has had the wisdom to bring you here, because it's going to make a lot of difference in the future. And I just want to say thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support, your prayers, and your relationship, and I'm excited to see where this goes moving forward. I think God has some pretty cool things in store for Community Church, City Serve, and Longview at large.
We really hope today's episode was helpful. You'll find more resources and content to connect with other community leaders by going to our website, cityservecowlitz.org. So, it's been a joy to walk with you, and we'll see you soon.